Hi, welcome to part 3. Today we're going to be digging into models, which is where we'll start to see the true power of Django, because so far we've haven't seen much. We've just seen sort of a landing page and a little bit of the admin, but without our own models, it's not as fun. So let's make some models. What is a model? So a model is a term in programming, in software development, that kind of represents data that is generally going to be persistent. It's going to store somewhere. And we're essentially going to be creating a class that represents an instance of that model. So I've opened up the models.py inside content. And for this tutorial, we're going to kind of just set up a data model for something like Spotify or any kind of like music library. Maybe it's even just for a website that, you can list your favorite albums and artists and tracks. And I think the reason I want to do this is we can talk a lot about relationships, because in this data architecture, we're actually going to have 3 different models. We're going to have an album, we're going to have an artist, and we're going to have a track that are all sort of like connected, right? Because within, you might have an artist and they could have multiple albums, and inside each album, there's multiple tracks. So I think it's just a good example. Of course, if you want to kind of follow along using, a totally different thing like video games or, websites or whatever you want, you totally could. The patterns I'm showing here are not specific to music. It's just a good example. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a class, and we're going to call this, we'll start with track. We'll kind of start at the bottom of this sort of like tree of relationships that I was mentioning. And this class is not just going to be a standalone class on its own. It's actually going to inherit another class. Specifically, it's going to inherit models.model. Okay? Now, inside our track, we're going to have various properties. I'm going to start pretty basic. We're going to have a title. And here, we need to say, so this is kind of like the field name. This is like the database column, essentially. And it's going to have, it's going to be a char field. So a char field is one of the types of fields, and we'll be seeing, some other things in a moment. And each type of field has some different properties we generally have to set. One of them, specifically on a char field, is the max length. And this is just so that they can optimize the type of database field to use depending on it, and also make the database more efficient. So for a title, we might want to give it a max length of, 100 or something. Like that seems long enough. And we could, of course, do research and look up, titles of tracks and see what they are. I'm going to go with this one. And the cool thing about Django is we could, make this a change in the future to this and run a database migration to update it. So we're not stuck forever making this decision, but we do have to give it a max length. We can also do things like allow it to be blank and allow it to be null, which are similar but different. However, I think a track needs to have a title. So we're not going to do that, but we'll see some examples of that later. Okay, so we have the title, and then maybe we'll also have a length. And we'll call it actually like second, or I'll call it like duration seconds, just to be really clear. And in this case, because we only care about seconds, we're just going to use a integer field for this, models.integer field. And similarly, we don't need to put a max length. It's going to be whatever. The max length is really like how big an integer can get, which is quite large for this context. So we're not going to set any properties here. Okay, so we have a title, we have a duration, seconds, and maybe we also have something like lyrics. And in this case, we're going to use what's called a text field. And a text field is kind of like a char field, except we don't set a max length. It can kind of be really as long as we as the system we design allows it. It's stored differently than a char field in the database. It's more efficient for storing large text. It also supports things like multi-line or like line breaks and all that kind of stuff without doing anything super weird. So this is good, a good use for something like lyrics. Okay. Lastly, I think those are good for now for our fields. We're obviously going to be adding an artist to this and an album and all that kind of stuff. But this is good for now. The next thing that I want to do is set a string representation of this. And this is really used for like things like logging and things for like in the admin. What do we want when we're printing this out in our console or whatever the case, how do we want this to be reflected? And we can simply just go def__str and pass self into here. What self is referring to is because this is really just like we're designing kind of like the structure, the shape of a model, we're going to, in theory, have multiple tracks. It's not a singleton. It's not like this app only supports one track. We're going to have multiple. And when we're talking about self, we're talking about this exact instance that we're dealing with in code. This might make more sense later if it doesn't now. But anytime you have a method within a class, self will always be the first parameter. Technically, you can call this anything you want. You can call it like me or this, like JavaScript or whatever, but self is the common convention in Python. So I would just say, just call it self. Don't confuse other people. Because if another developer comes in and they see, why are you calling it something else? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So we'll just call it self. And here we can return from this function self.title. So that's cool. That means that, whenever we're printing this out or seeing it in the admin, it knows that this is kind of like the string representation of it. Another thing we can do is add some metadata to our model. And for this, we actually make a class inside here called meta, which is kind of a strange thing. It's a class within a class, but it's a totally normal thing you can do in Python. And in here, we are going to do a couple things. We are going to make a verbose name, and we're going to be equaling this to to track. And then we can also do verbose name plural. And this is really just for, development purposes and like for the admin. So it knows it's going to call this is referred to as track when it's, shown in the admin. And also like, this is how we want the plural version of it whenever there's a reason for it to be plural. And this is really helpful, especially when you have a word where it's not just adding an S. Django will automatically just take your verbose name and put an S on the end. But, say you had a word that the plural requires you to add an ES in English or whatever. We want to name it, this sort of way. So yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so now what we need to do is we're going to create our first migration because I'm pretty happy with this model, although I know it's going to change. I'm going to, we'll work with this to start. So I'm just going to go Python manage.py make migrations instead of migrate like we've done before. And you'll see, okay, cool. It ran migration for content, and we'll look inside the content folder, migrations, and then we'll actually go here, and it made this file. And this was auto-made for us based on our model. So Django was smart enough to read the data in our model, and it essentially created sort of like its own convention for how to talk to the database. So this is an SQL code. It's actually one step below it because, again, Django will work with multiple databases, so it needs to have all the the stuff to deal with Postgres versus SQLite versus whatever else you might want to throw at it. So this is kind of a class, and you can look more into this and see how all this stuff works. But you don't really have to because it just works. It's great. So we've generated this migration, and this is essentially allows us to. We're going to have eventually multiple migrations, maybe we'll be adding new fields, modifying fields, renaming them, that kind of stuff. And when we actually run the migrate command, if you remember earlier, it's going to actually run, if we had multiple in here, it'll run them in order so that we actually are building our database structure, in the correct order, which is super helpful when you have, multiple environments, multiple databases, and you can just kind of get one up to speed and it will do what it needs to do. So you can see it's doing some operations. It's creating a model called track. It's giving it these fields that we've kind of set. You'll see we didn't make ID, but ID is just built in to the normal. If we were to look at the model itself, ID is a required thing, and that's using that big integer, that big auto field that we configured in our settings. And then you can see the metadata. So it's just kind of like breaking it into a convention that it understands. Because again, this is tracking the change from the last time we ran migrations. If we made a change now, which actually let's do that. Let's decide, actually we want this to be 125, right? So what I could do is go Python manage.py make migrations. And you'll see alter field title on track. And if we actually look at that migration, we're going to see, okay, it's not as long because not as much changed. It's telling you the dependencies. So this has to be run first. It just, makes sure that that one was already run before this one's tried to run. And then it's doing an operation. It's doing an alter field of the model track, specifically the field called title. And then it's saying, hey, it's now going to be a char field of 125 instead of what we had it before. So that's cool. Now we have to remember, just because we've made the migration files, we actually haven't run the migration files yet. So that's where Python manage.py migrate comes in. And you'll see it actually ran both of them because we never ran it before. Ran them in order. And now our database is ready to work with this type of model. So how can we test this? Well, we could build an API around it. We could, create some views. We could even go into the Django shell. And in fact, I'll show that real quick. And then we'll do what I usually do first, which is configure it and add it to the admin so you can make sure everything's good. But we haven't talked about this yet, but another command we can run is shell, Python manage.py shell. And this is a Python shell, but it's actually a Python shell. It's already bootstrapped with your Django application and settings and everything. So what we can do in here, for instance, is we can go from content.models import track. And now we can do stuff like tracks equal track.objects.all. And I can do that, and I can run it and see it's a query set that's empty. Now, if this doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry, we're gonna have a whole topic on dealing with the ORM, but I'm just showing you we actually have this. And we could even create a new track by going t equals track.objects.create. And if I just try and run this, we are gonna get an error because it's saying, hey, duration seconds is a required field, a bunch of other errors in here. But if we try to run it by saying, the title is going to be test track, duration is going to be equal to, in this case, let's just say it's 30 seconds. And sorry, it's called duration _ seconds. And then let's just make lyrics equal to test 1, 2, 3. We can actually go and we can go t.save. And now if I rerun that command again, where we were getting all the tracks, and go tracks, we'll actually see there's a track, and that's been saved in our database, which is kind of cool. It exists. Even if we quit this shell and come back, it'll be there unless we wipe our data. That's the only reason it would be gone. So there we have our sort of test track. Now, one other thing I want to show you is the fact that we sometimes want fields to be null and blank. So what I can do here is go null equals true, blank equals true. And that way, we will allow, right now this wouldn't have worked if I didn't put lyrics. It would have said, hey, this can't be null. So I'm going to make a migration here, Python manage.py, make migrations. And let's run migrate again. And if we looked at that migration file just to see, we'll see that it did an alter field and it actually said it's now a text field where blank is true and null is true. So that will now mean if we try to do that again with lyrics being completely omitted, it would still work. And I think that's something that makes sense. Lyrics should be, we're not going to have lyrics for every track. In fact, what if it's an instrumental song? Like, we don't want to have, this field being required in general. Okay, so I've done a few migrations. We can kind of see it's getting a little bit messy. This is not terrible. It will work fine. But there's a concept called squashing migrations. And this is something especially easy to do when you don't have any real data yet. And because we're just on a local database, we can do this. Keep in mind, if you've already got a production app up using, this code, there's a totally different way that's out of the scope of this that you would have to deal with sort of squashing migrations. And in fact, I don't usually squash migrations on an existing feature when it already has a production app, because you can run into problems. But let's say, hey, I want, I really want to, what I made this, and then I just made a change. I don't want all these files anymore. So what we can actually do is we can run Python manage.py migrate, then choose the app name, and in this case it's content, then 0. So 0 means it's going to go back to the start. It's basically going to run all these migrations in reverse order, which is kind of cool. So we do 0, and you'll see it actually unapplied in reverse order. Then what I can do is actually delete those 3 files that were just ran right here. Delete. Now I go Python manage.py, make migrations. And you'll see it just made one migration file now because it didn't have to track those changes. I zeroed them out, and now we actually have it with the 125 and the blank equals true, null equals true. So sometimes, this is a really good practice when you're kind of like prototyping and figuring out your model and realizing, no, it needs to be like this, it needs to be like this. I've done all these things that are just kind of like changing things back and forth, and it's kind of like all these files that now have to run every time we spin up a new database environment. This is just like a clean way to do. And again, I will just repeat, like if you're already in production and you were to do this in this way, when you deploy next, it's not going to work, because it's going to realize like it's just not going to understand, because you would, unless that data, there's no data in that database in that particular model or table, like you're going to run into big problems. So this is definitely something to be doing, really great to do when you're just local and you don't care about your data. It's just test data and you're just kind of like figuring out. Or like if you are in production and it's a totally new app that you've made, like a new Django app that hasn't actually made it to production, you can do this safely because you're not going to be modifying production data. So just please keep that in mind. Don't just go, oh, I just inherited this project I'm going to squash all the migrations. Like you will, run into some major problems and have to kind of go back through version control to fix it. So just disclaimer. But yeah, that's clean. That's nice. Now we just kind of have this one thing, and we might do that a few more times as we're building this out. After creating a new model, I do like to add it to the admin so that we can see it in there. So right now, if I was running the server, and I just realized we made the migration, but we didn't actually migrate, and that's why we're getting this little warning here. So let's actually migrate it, and let's run the server. And again, I can just use make run because, in the first video, we were looking at shorthands we could make. So there we go, make run, and just runs python manage.py run server. And if we actually go to the admin here, we'll just go / I think we renamed it to manage, but yours might still be admin. And I will log in with hopefully the correct credentials. We'll see it's not here yet because we actually have to tell Django, hey, register this in the admin and configure it the way we want it. So in order to do that, we can just go to inside content. There's an admin.py. And here we are going to register it. To do so, we first need to import the model we want. So we can go from .models because we're already in that same folder. We can go import and choose our track model. There we go. And then we take this admin and we can actually use @admin because it's actually a decorator, which is something we'll probably cover a little bit more, but we can go @admin.register, and then we actually want to register track. Then we create a class called, and it's good just to call it like whatever the name of your model is, admin. This is just a convention. You could technically call it whatever you want, but this will work totally fine. And here we want to do admin.modeladmin. And this is where you configure all the fields we want to allow. Now, if we're just trying to get this up and running and don't really want to worry about that, we can simply write the word pass here, which is really just a way in Python, because it's an indentation-based thing. It's expecting something to be here, but pass is a valid thing we can put. And this will actually just work right out of the gate. So we'll go here and we'll actually see in content, we have tracks now, and we have the ability to add a track. And, you might be wondering, where's that track that we made? Well, because I was just wondering, I was like, oh, didn't we make one? But we did that whole migration squash. We squashed the migrations, which obviously like also removes the data, which is why I was saying like, don't do that in production, because we reran all the stuff. So we don't actually have that track, but we can go in here and actually add it. So let's first of all just see, I'm going to click save, and we actually get some errors here because the Django admin's smart enough to read your models and know what's required. So it doesn't just like throw a database error, it actually like pre-validates it for you. So we'll just call this, my track. And because it was an integer field, it actually gives us like the little number field that not only allows us to put up and down, but we can't type, if I try and type letters, we're going to see, I'll click save and we'll see an error. This field just like wiped it. It only allowed the number. So let's make it 30. And I'm not getting any errors on lyrics because we've made that something that's allowed to be blank and null. So there we have my track. So a little quick tour of the admin. So we have on the left-hand side, all of our different models. Right now it's just this one. This is the list view. And because we haven't configured it, we're just seeing, the word track here. And it says my track. And the reason it's able to even understand this, and I'll show you what I mean, let's get rid of this string thing that we did, the string method. And if I actually do this, you see it's just like track object 1. So this is kind of just like the default. If I didn't put the string, it's just going to use the name of the model and then the word object because it's one instance, one object of it, and then the primary key because this is actually track 1 in our database. So that's what's nice about doing this. We can actually have a pretty version of it. Then in the detail one, we have, of course, the fields to do it. We also have ability to save, to delete, and we even have like this history where we can kind of see how it works. Now, keep in mind the history, this is an admin specific history. There are, plugins and stuff you can install that will work beyond the admin. But if this was added through your API or even through the command line, you're not going to see a history there. It's something that's being tracked just from an administrative point of view. Great tool in Django 5, I think actually since Django 4. So yeah, that's the edit view. This is the the list view. There's also some actions, so I can select any of these, and you'll see there's the delete selected tracks. And when you are deleting things in the Django admin, you do always get a confirmation page, and it will tell you what is actually being deleted. In this case, there's a summary saying one track is going to be deleted, and it tells you specifically what track it is, and I can click through to make sure it's good. And this comes really in handy when you have relationships. For instance, if there's an artist and you're deleting the artist and it has 10 tracks, it's going to show you, hey, one artist is being deleted, 10 tracks is being deleted, that kind of thing. So really handy, really great. We're not actually going to delete it though. Now, generally, you're going to want to configure the admin a bit differently, and we're actually going to have a full video on like really complex admin configuration and stuff like that later, but I wanted to show you just a couple things. So in our admin.py, instead of just passing, there's some stuff we can put in here. For instance, we can do list display, and this will take a list of the fields that we want. So let me just open up, it's nice to have two things you can see, on the model on the left and our admin on the right. And here we can actually put things like title, duration, seconds, and lyrics. Although realistically, we probably wouldn't want lyrics here because it would get really long, right? So we'll just have those. And simply by doing that, if we actually refresh here, we're actually going to see two different columns, right? And what's cool is these are actually orderable too. Now, let's make another track so I can actually show it. My other track. And let's make this one shorter, 10 seconds, and I'll put some lyrics in here and we'll save. So we can actually order, by these things, which is really handy, as well as by the title and stuff like that. So that allows us to, to sort of see this in a way that we want to configure. We can also decide what fields show up here. So by default, it just kind of puts everything, but if for some reason, we wanted to override this or even change the order, we can go here and do fields. Fields equal. And here, there's a couple different approaches. Sorry, I called it fields, it should be field sets. Field sets equal. And this, we're going to make a tuple. So basically it's like a list, but it's not, it's like a list with like key values and is immutable. And it's actually going to be a tuple of tuples. And what we can do in here is actually put like the word, maybe like details, and this will essentially create a header. And then within it, we put a dictionary of all the sort of like metadata. And in this case, all we care about is what fields to support. And here we'll have a list. And maybe in here we just have, let's just do title for now, just so we can see. And I realize I missed one thing here because, we do need a trailing comma, at least on this pink one. Otherwise, because we don't have multiple things, my formatter, which is black, will sort of change it to something else. So now if we actually refresh this, you see all we have is title, and we have this nice little header here. And maybe we can also put, duration, seconds here as well. And we'll see that's there. And then we could break this, up into another thing. So I can actually just copy this again. And, maybe we have extra info or something, right? And here we might have the lyrics. So we have extra info. And something that's also nice to maybe do is we can also put one at the very top that is just going to be the ID, just so you can kind of see the ID. Because currently the only way you really know the ID is by the URL, but you might want to have the ID here. And I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm actually going to make this say none, literally none, which is like the null in Python, because maybe I don't want actually a header. Sorry, I might have to make this PK. Let's just see. All right, now there's one thing we do have to do in order for this to show up. We have to make this a read-only field because otherwise it will try and make a form, and you can never actually edit an ID of something. It's just databases don't allow you to do that. They're auto-incrementing. So we're going to go read-only fields equals, and let's just do ID. And then I believe this will work, but bear with me if it doesn't. No, there it is. So here we have this. There's no header because we're just showing, this, and you can of course have a header there. I'm just showing you like what we can do. And then we actually have it sort of like the details here and extra info and, all that good stuff. So yeah, that's cool. We have a bit of a configuration. And again, we're going to go deeper into all the things we can do later on. Okay, a couple more things I want to touch on the model side. So we'll close the admin for now. There's a few other fields that I think are super useful, and there's many more. We're not going to get to all of them, but we didn't talk about Boolean fields. So I'm going to make a new one called isPublished, and it's going to be equal to models.boolean field. And let's make its default. We could actually set a default, which is something I haven't shown yet, so that it's technically not a required field, but if something's not supplied, it'll just always default to false. So let's use that. Generally with Booleans, I do just have a default. So we'll have isPublished. That's one thing we might want. Then another great thing might be what's called a choice field. And to do this, we can create something like call it track type. Okay, and this is going to so this is another subclass within our class, and we can use models.char text choices. Sorry, and in here we can actually create sort of like an enum, essentially, of some different choices. So maybe one of our choices is instrumental, a track that's only has instruments. And what we have to do is first we set what do we want to refer to this in the database. So generally this should be like, something small. So I could just do like instr like this, but I'm not too worried. We'll call it instrumental. And then we do a comma, and then we actually do what is this going to be referred to in the presentation side, which really for us right now is how will this look in the admin. And in this case, we'll just do instrumental like this. Then we might have another one, and this isn't supposed to be like genre because we're going to have, maybe some other model actually represent that. So I'm trying to think of, maybe another example. We could do like acapella, which is kind of the opposite of instrumental, right? Let's just try and spell this and do it again. And remember to do this. And then lastly, maybe we have like, mixed. And that would just be equal to mixed and mixed. And maybe we call this instrument type instead, because it's kind of to do with like the instrumental. Now, doing this doesn't actually add a field yet. This is just kind of configuring it in a nice way. And what we want to do now is make something called instrument type, snake case like this. And it's going to be models, and it is going to be a char field because this is text-based choices. So we're going to be storing text here. There's also int-based choices if you wanted, which we would use an integer field for. But here in models.char field, now we still need to give it a max length because it's a char field. So what we can do is actually just look at what the longest length is, this one right here, and I'm just going to, kind of overdo it just in case we add another one. Again, you could always change it, but let's just say 16 because I'm pretty sure this is less than 16 characters. But then just to make Django sort of like squawk errors, if someone chooses something that's not in here, we can actually go choices, and choices are going to be equal to instrument. Choices are going to be equal to track. So we actually refer to, instrument. Oh, I see why I wasn't getting the IntelliSense. I'm spelling everything wrong. Instrument type. So choices are going to be equal to instrument type dot choices. Okay. And here we can say, I want this to be something that's always required. But we can actually just set a default, which I think is a good practice to do here. So we'll just use instrument type dot, and in this case, let's say mix. A normal track is going to have voice and, instruments. So we'll just make that our default, and I'll just do a trailing comma just so I kind of get this nice sort of thing happening here. While I'm mentioning that, I will sort of pivot for a moment and say, I'm using something called black for my code formatting. And it's as simple to install as really just going pip install black. I actually have it installed globally, so it works with all my Python projects because it's not really like a dependency that matters if it gets out of date, because it's not really part of our project. But you'll simply just do a pip install black, and then in VS Code you may have to configure it to be your default code editor, and of course, just because I did that so long ago, I don't remember exactly how to set it up. Please look it up. And what black does is it follows like a really good convention to sort of do the way things should sort of be broken and formatted, and spacing and all that kind of stuff. It'll also change. You'll notice if I make this single quotes, hopefully, it becomes double when I save. So I just want to mention that, because you might be wondering, why does this code keep getting changed and looks so much better than mine? And that is why I'm using something called black. All right, so we have that now, and of course we've made changes to our model. So let's go Python manage.py make migrations, and of course we could have chosen to squash at this point, but I've already shown you how to do that, so we're not going to do it. And then we need to run the migrate, and then we'll rerun our server. And because now we're configuring our admin, if we actually go back here, we're not going to see those new fields, right? Because we're not saying it, we're not telling it to be there. So let's go and configure that now. And let's add is published. So this can maybe be, I feel like this maybe fits inside extra info for now. And then also instrument type. Let's put that in here too. And if we refresh, we'll see those things now. See, because we set a default, which is a nice thing to do, we got this sort of, this data got applied to this automatically through the migration process. And same with is published, it's set to false. So it's nice to have defaults for that, for that reason and others. Now, now that we have these sort of things, we can actually, I can show you one more cool thing about the admin. So back over here, we already did something for read-only fields, list display. We can also have something for filtering. List filter is what we want. And here we can choose the different things that we want to allow filtering. Now, filtering won't work on every kind of field, or even if it does, it might not be relevant. For instance, like filtering by ID, is kind of a weird thing to do, right? If I see here, it's going to show me like filtering by an ID. Okay, I want only the ones that are 1 or only the ones that are 2. Those are always going to be unique. No need to ever filter by ID. But something that's perfect to filter by is instrument type. And simply by putting instrument type in this list, we actually get this filter, and I can go and say, okay, I only want to see instrumental ones, or I only want to see a cappella ones, or I only want to see mixed. Both of us are mixed, so they come up. We might also want to filter by, what was our other one? Is published. And just to show this a little bit better, let me actually edit one of these tracks. I'll make it a cappella and I'll make it published. And we'll just go save. So now you'll see it's gone because we're actually filtering. I can clear all my filters just by clicking this. But now I can say, okay, show me only the published ones, or the ones that aren't published, or ignore that filter altogether. Or instrumental versus a cappella versus mixed. And there you go. So this is a super handy thing to do too. All right, I am going to leave it there for this lesson, and in the next one we're going to be doing 2 main things. One, we're going to set up an abstract model that will make life really nice, and you'll see why. And secondly, we are going to start up some relationships. So we're actually going to build some new models that represent like the album and the artist, and see how can these relate to each other in many-to-many and foreign key relationships. All right, see you there.